This is Lakshmi, and I have a question about one of the fact that you made, that Americans, if they want to become like Hindus or think like Hindus at least, they need to have a sense of belonging. I've seen some of my friends really interested to know about India and Indian culture, but in general, when I came here, I realized that Americans are very independent and very individualistic in their way of life and way of thought, apart from being religious. And I don't see Americans here as religious Christians as Christians in India are religious. Like, that's the kind of difference that I'm observing. And I would like you to... and one more question that I have is vegetarianism there in any other Christian culture that is perfect contrast to Hinduism? Like you said, Indian culture and Jewish can't go together, that is both complementary. So is vegetarianism, that is something that can be used as universal? Okay. Thank you.
It's a good question. It's a common belief I argue against in this book. It's a common belief that Westerners are more individualistic and Indians are more stuck in their caste and their jati, and they're stuck in a hierarchy and they're not able to think for themselves. These are stereotypes the European Indologists built about us. I argue many counterexamples. Indian music is improvisation. That's a lot of freedom. Not fixed music scores that your whole orchestra has to keep repeating, performing. Indian chef is not, you take so many ounces of this to so many degrees for so many minutes. Indian chef produces wonderful things from intuition, improvises. The chapter 4 on order and chaos shows how Indians are very comfortable with uncertainty, and uncertainty, creativity, unpredictability, flux are at the heart of individuality, Indian individuality. Whereas Westerners are taught to be, Western religion teaches them to be more relying on dogma, order, fixation, and any dogma-oriented, order-oriented is less individualistic. So Westerners, conformity with religion, conformity with one book, conformity with one particular deity, conformity with one church, is not individualistic as far as religion goes. They may be more individualistic, they'll have their high lifestyle and have money, and they can have hairstyles and clothes and travel around and say, I'm very individualistic. But those who are Christian have very little improvisation, whereas I as a Hindu have much more flexibility in my Ishta Devata. I can do this ritual or do that ritual or whatever. I am not led by a congregation, one guy teaching, everybody has to comply and obey. And this comes from a whole history of obedience. God in Christianity, in Judaism, Christianity and Islam, the primary idea is obedience. Primary idea. And the human disobedience by Adam and Eve, and disobedience by others, and disobedience by others is called sin. So the whole story is God's edicts for obedience and man's disobedience creating sin, and then the resulting outcome of that. And the three Abrahamic religions have different versions of that single idea. God's obedience, man's disobedience, and all the problems that come out of that. So this fixation with the obedience as the ideal rather than going inward. See, if my faith says that I cannot go inward and have my observe, watch my own consciousness and get my own insight, that would be very individualistic. But if my faith says that I have to copy the history of that guy and what he said and basically obey that, I'm being less individualistic, more following a certain institutional method. So while Westerners are more individualistic in business, in commerce, in freedom, in travel, these kind of things, when it comes to religion, Westerners have very little freedom to deviate from their particular denomination's demands. Indians are not denominational. You go and look at a church has a roster of members. It's a very old thing. Now in America we started having members, church has a list of members and all that. But you know, you go to Encyclopedia Britannica or you go to some website and you look at a How many people are members of various denominations? They'll tell you Southern Baptists, so many million, Baptists, so many million, Presbyterian, Episcopalians, Lutherans, blah, blah, blah. Every denomination has a very formal list of who are members. And you ask a person, are you an Episcopalian? He'll say, yeah, I'm Episcopalian. The other guy will say, I'm Southern Baptist. The other guy will say, I'm Mormon. Very clear. I don't see, if you ask a Hindu, he will not say, I am this. Very few will, very orthodox people will say that. Most will say, on Monday I do Shiv Vrat, and on Navratri I do that, and on, this one I go and celebrate this and that. I kind of ad hoc, mix match more easily for Hindus. So more individualism in that respect. And you see in a family, you see my family, my grandmother did something, my grandfather doing some havan, and his one son going to this temple, another one doing that. Lot of freedom. And so that's because the argumentative nature and the individual nature, the idea of swadharma. I explain in this. The idea of swadharma is the ultimate individualism, which says, like we have on the web, we have my websites, my favorites, my documents. So we have my dharma. Okay. So just like on your desktop is individualized and is not one uniform for everybody. You can have your desktop, you can have my favorites, my whatever. In the case of spirituality and faith, I can have my tradition, my dharma. It's called swadharma. Now you can't have my Christianity. You can't. There is the Christianity. For a Baptist, it is particular interpretation. He will not accept Lutheran in the same church. He will not. Lutheran has got his idea. The church defines what is the Lutheran view. Every Lutheran follows that. The Lutheran website will tell you, to be a Lutheran, you must comply with the following rules. 1, 2, 3, you sign up for that. If you don't, you can't join in. So, this is belief-based. Belief is standardized, canonized, institutionally controlled. Institutions, a given church passes resolution on do we allow gays or not. And that becomes the institutional position. All the members follow that. There is dissent, argumentation, and then they keep putting it back for vote, and one day it gets turned over, and that becomes the new policy. Should women become priests or not? Each denomination got a policy. That's the policy. We don't have policies like that. We have guidelines, but even Manusmriti says that the highest dharma is your swadharma, your dharma. Then, so there's many kinds of dharma. There's jati dharma, which is sort of uniformed by the elders of the jati. There's varna dharma, there's ashram dharma, there is your dharma for your desh, and then the ultimate dharma is swadharma, my dharma, based on my guna, my conditions, my circumstances, my state of evolution. This is why we are able to accept that some guy needs to be into obedience for very tamasic people, too much freedom is not good, because it's like children who need some discipline. If you tell them you can improvise the way you drive, you can do whatever, they'll get in trouble. You can't improvise. You can't, when you're learning music, a junior guy is taught to copy and repeat the same same beat. Only a very advanced maestro goes beyond normative thinking and uniformity and standardization. He's allowed to go break the mold. That is the highest in our tradition. Dancer, same way, he can improvise. But when your starting point, it is uniformity. So a Hindu view would be that the Abrahamic religions are for beginners, because there's a lot of obedience, very little improvisation, very little deviation from a standardized normative approach. So I would argue that there is far more individualism as far as the religiosity is concerned, far more individualism in our tradition. I also explain in this book, dharma cannot be equated as religion for this very reason, because religion is conformity, and that conformity is God gives this one final prophet or one son some edicts, and that has to be followed, and there is no such thing as I had an enlightenment experience, I'm following mine. Or I'm following Raman Maharshi because he was enlightened and nothing to do with what any text says. I'm following my guru. The idea that there is a living master who is enlightened is very scary to the Abrahamic religions. Because in the Abrahamic religions, you might not know this, but to be a saint, one has to be dead. You can't have living saints. In the Christian church, they have had tens of thousands of saints. They have a list of them. and which date each one was canonized, by which pope, and what was his accomplishment, what miracles he performed that made him worth being a saint. Not one saint in the history of Christianity was made a saint while they were alive. They all had to be saint only after they're dead. Why? Because a living saint would be a threat to the institutional authority. The living saint could say, I am enlightened, I have the ultimate knowing, I have reached unity consciousness, and I'm telling you this. Whatever these church people are saying, they're a bunch of babus and bureaucrats, they don't know. People will go to the living saint, they will not go to the institution. So, to create institutional authority, you have to get rid of the living saint tradition. Christianity did that. Many mystics were actually persecuted and killed. And those who were canonized as saints were only after they're dead, because the dead guy is safe, he can't talk back. He can't teach anything, he can't be a threat. You see what I'm saying? And you have to be dead for 5 years, that makes sure that you're really dead, In rare examples like Mother Teresa, they can waive the 5 year and make it 3 years. But you got to make sure the guy is gone, dead. A dead saint, canonized as saint, becomes property of the church. He's like a brand, he's like a mascot. I can do fundraising in his name. I can have schools and colleges. Now I can make up whatever I want about him. He's not going to argue back. He's kind of my property. So the living saint tradition versus the dead saint tradition, the living enlightenment in us as Swachchitanand, living enlightenment in us, versus one person in history only had that experience, nobody else can. No Christian is allowed to say that he is Jesus and he can have the same experience as Jesus had. He cannot. No Muslim will agree that he has the potential, maybe difficult, but among all the Muslims, some people will achieve the potential of having the exact same experience as Muhammad. They cannot. It only happened once, it will never happen, you don't even have the potential. But I'm allowed to say that I have the same potential in me as any Rishi ever had. I can have because I'm Satchitanand, I am the exact same thing that he is. I'm not any different. Whether I've realized it or not is up to me. You see? So this is a huge difference between the individualism and freedom. They keep saying they're more free, but I'm pointing out reasons why we are more free. These are all ideas of freedom. We don't have the bondage to history. They are bondage to history, bondage to dead prophet, bondage to one event, one book, one canon, one church which is going to enforce it. We don't have that. So this is a very big difference. Now the second question was what? Vegetarianism. Okay. So lot of people in Western religions are turning vegetarian for health reasons. Health reasons. It's all about what's good for me according to medical science. It's not rights of that animal. Then there is animal rights. There are animal rights people. A lot of animal rights are Hindu influence in the West. This is the idea of earth is sacred, kind of Hindu experience, Hindu idea. And I explain very clearly in this book, the cosmos is not divine presence. That is called pantheism. And that is a pagan idea which is banned in Christianity. In Islam, if you say the earth is sacred, even ask an informed Muslim, is the Kaaba sacred? They'll say, no, it's a holy place, but it's not sacred. Sacred means divine presence. Like in our murtis, there's divine presence. You do pran pratishtha, there's divine presence. So for us, there's divinity present in so many places. And that is considered idol worship, and it is banned in those traditions. Because divinity is only external to the cosmos, not present in the cosmos. God created the cosmos like somebody makes a clock or a machine or a computer and turns it on and it works. But God's immanence and presence is not the same way as we see it. So when we see the idea of killing an animal and eating as a karma, it is not the same logic for them to be vegetarian. Their logic is different. They may also decide not to eat. They may be a better vegetarian, more rigorous than we are. Many of them are more rigorous than we are. But philosophically and metaphysically, they're not doing it for the same reason. And when they say we will protect the environment, in fact, Westerners have become cleaner in the environment now in the last 30, 40 years than Indians. And they're very good at it. But it is not that the environment is sacred, has its own rights. It's because we humans, if we have a dirty environment, it will be bad for our health. The fish industry will die, it will be bad for our economy. the air will get polluted and we'll have to do more cleanup. So environment is our property. God made the world as man's property to exploit, animals included. Bible is very clear. God made animals and world for man's pleasure. In the earlier time, even women were made for that. But later they sort of reformed it. Yeah. But the idea that all of this is sacred is very Hindu idea. We ask Mother Earth's forgiveness when the child is going to begin to start walking, because I'm going to walk on the Mother Earth. When we harvest, we chant mantras, we do it in a certain way at a certain time because we want to do it very ethically, not over harvest, because we may be hurting the plant. We are required to do that. And you see, there is no such thing as this is all product for man's consumption, and we basically can use it and exploit it because God made it for us. But this is true in the case of the Abrahamic religions. Meat eating is sanctified as something God has given for you. So that is, and you should also understand, people are translating yajna as sacrifice. Don't translate it as yajna as sacrifice. Sacrifice is human sacrifice that then got turned into other ideas of sacrifice. Human sacrifice existed in some of these Middle Eastern societies. And then God decides that He will be the final human sacrifice as Jesus. Jesus is considered in Christianity as human sacrifice to therefore end future need for human sacrifice. This is true. And the whole, I have a friend in Princeton who's a big Westerner. She's a Catholic and she's a scholar of Catholicism and become very famous and popular now for writing a very provocative interpretation. And she gives a lot of interpretation of the importance of human sacrifice and then replacing it with symbolic alternatives. Now it is symbolically like when you are eating the body of Christ and drinking His blood, these kind of rituals. So you are symbolically enacting that sacrifice to participate in that sacrifice because you don't want to really do it, so you participate in it symbolically. How the whole system based on, number one, obedience, edicts from God, number two, man's disobedience turning into sin, and then the remedy is sacrifice. So when we are doing yajna, it is nothing to do with that. Yajna is a non-translatable. So for us, going back to your question, vegetarianism is a different rationale. Sometimes you have different rationales leading to the same end result in terms of what you do, but your thought process is quite different in that case. No Westerner would say that, this, like I had a dog who died 2 years ago, and I had a lot of experiences about this being a child from a previous life in our family. And so many times everybody in the family felt that there's something very amazing about this dog's presence. Now, Christians, Jewish, Islamic people can't relate to that, can't understand what this guy is saying. They would not think of an animal that we've ever had an animal life in our past. They would not think that way. They would not. But when Buddha got enlightenment, and a lot of Hindu enlightened beings felt the same way, Buddha says, I recall, I have been a butterfly, I've been an insect, I've been an elephant, I've been this, I've been a snake, I've been a rat, I've been this. I recall all that. And I've been in this race, and I've been in that race, I've been born in this tribe, that place. He had a sudden, instant flash of past, thousands of lives, all happening now. He experienced that. So our tradition is that you are bringing in your prarabdha, in your deep, deep unconscious, you're bringing your collective experience of so many lives that are shaping who you are. So our relationship with animals and plants and sacred nature is very, very different than these other traditions, even though they may be vegetarian.